Hello and welcome to the University of Law podcast and to our 24 questions in 2024 series. I'm Alex Gill, an LLB student studying at Bristol campus, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jonny Dudley, a psychology lecturer here at the university. So, hi Jonny, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi Alex, thank you very much for having me.
To start us off, could you tell a bit about us in 60 seconds, just about your current role on the course and employment, just as an overview for the listeners?
Yeah, so this is my first lectureship. I'm fresh off the PhD. I'm a psychology lecturer here at the University of Law on the Leeds campus. So my lecturing responsibilities are primarily on the psychology courses. So our master's degrees, both online and face-to-face, and our BSc degree as well. I do dabble in other stuff as well, teaching forensic psychology because that's my area and my background, on the policing course as well, and then kind of, doing the odd taster days and things like that, showing them what fun forensic psychology can be.
What would you say you enjoy most about your course, your job for the course?
Definitely the teaching. I can tell you it's definitely not marking. Marking certainly not what I enjoy the most. But teaching, I love being with the students and working with them and kind of getting the most out of their abilities and what they can do. Especially when you take something like stats and things like that students are not necessarily fans of, or the more complex high level stuff, and you can kind of help a student get their head around it, and you can kind of see that they've kind of got it. I think that's a brilliant feeling. I kind of love having that interaction with the students.
Yeah, and then I guess to give people a bit of background, could you tell us a bit more about your journey into becoming a lecturer in psychology? And I understand that I think you work with young offenders, and you did a PhD looking into sexual offences and how society can prevent those crimes. So I guess a bit of background into how you got into doing being a psychology lecturer would be quite a good start.
Yeah, no, you've certainly done your homework, Alex. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
So yeah, like you say, I sort of started out my I guess I'm very cheesy, but my psychology journey. I started out doing a BSc in psychology. Realized very quickly, and kind of going into that forensic was kind of the area I wanted to go. Growing up, I either wanted to be Batman or a Jedi, and unfortunately, I realized I was neither rich enough nor I had parents, so that wasn't going to be a feasible career for me. So I decided that I was going to do a BSc in psychology and go into forensic psychology. And then I went straight into my master's in applied forensic psychology, which I really enjoyed. And the aim for me then was to go and work in an institution, work in some, not necessarily young offenders, but within the kind of the prison system, and become a forensic psychologist that way. I worked at HMYOI Wetherby up here in North Yorkshire, as I started out teaching and then sort of helped out in the psychology department and kind of got my way in there, and worked there for about 2 years. Realised when I did a piece of research for the prison service and for the sort of education provider there, that I actually really enjoyed the research side of things, and that whilst I enjoyed working in the prison, there were perhaps certain barriers, I would say, to the amount of good I felt I could do working in a prison. The level of funding that we give prisons, the amount of psychologists that are available to young people. I felt like my skills and my passion were better sort of served in a research and academic capacity and trying to do things in more kind of bigger picture. So I decided to go back and do my PhD. I did my PhD, as you said, sort of looking at sexual offending. I worked with sexual offenders quite largely at Wetherby. That was kind of an area I worked in the high dependency unit because of my psychology background, and worked with a lot of the lads there who were sex offenders. And I just kind of found their demeanors and their the way that they behaved to be more interesting, because typically they were the lads that I would work with and think, what the hell are you doing here? Like, you don't belong. You sort of, you don't, some of them seemed when you were working with them very lovely lads. They were very intelligent and it just sort of didn't fit with a lot of the other lads. So I always kind of found that very fascinating. And so I got an opportunity to go back, do a PhD, looking at bystander intervention behavior into sexual violence. So we started looking at things like factors that might affect whether somebody intervenes when they witness an act of sexual violence. And we kind of zeroed in on alcohol and looking at the role alcohol plays within that kind of social interaction. And that's ultimately we carried out 4 studies, and I wrote a thesis, and now I get to run around calling myself Dr. Dudley.
Exactly, it's perks, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
You mentioned it in what you just said, but could you explain a bit more about what forensic psychology is?
Yeah, so other than being obviously the best branch of psychology, it's
Obviously.
obviously so. Anytime we apply psychology or psychological knowledge to the justice or the legal system. So that can be a variety of things. Typically within forensic psychology, we immediately think of, why is somebody a serial killer and all those kind of things. And it could be why people commit crime. It can be the causes behind crime. It can be what leads people to behave in a certain way, whether that's antisocial or criminal behavior. But it can also be things like juror behavior. It could be witness behavior, which example is kind of what I was looking at in part of my PhD, the way that we perceive victims. So in my research area, one of the big things that we look at is victim blaming and things like rape myth acceptance. So why do we, I'm sure we've all heard things like, when, a victim of sexual violence, when we're talking about someone like that, and we'll say, oh, well, she was drunk, or they were wearing this, or he shouldn't have gone down this dark alley, or whatever, all those kind of things that we look at victim blaming, things like that, how we perceive victims, how we perceive certain perpetrators, things like that.
There we go. And then along with that, what other areas of psychology do you cover on the course as well at the university?
Yeah, so kind of our core modules that we kind of have within, so that we have a master's conversion course, and we also have a BSc, but we look at a variety of different modules throughout the courses. So you've got things like social and critical psychology, looking at the way people interact, how we perceive one another, group behavior, things like that. Obviously everybody's favorite, research methods and statistics and things like that. That's obviously a necessary part of psychology. We've got to do stats, and we've got to do all those kind of forms of analysis, quantitative and qualitative, all that kind of stuff, because otherwise we just collect data and we can't do anything with it. Things like cognitive psychology, neuroscience of behavior, so thinking about thought processes, the way the brain interacts with our behavior. We literally have a module called Brain and Behavior. So then also we have a really interesting module, lifespan development, which is we sort of take you through the full human lifespan and the key sort of theories and approaches to each sort of period of somebody's life, and kind of how we can try explain behaviors and things like that on all those different kind of areas. And then across the courses we've obviously got was quite nice with what we do at ULaw is in third year of the undergraduate course, the BSc, we kind of give students the option to go and be taught psychology related modules, but so they can be law, policing, criminology, all our other departments, we kind of overlap. And so you will go and join, if you pick to do, one of our sort of, I don't know, psychology of law or legal psychology, all those kind of things, you will have that taught by both psychologists and lawyers and things like that. So some of our stuff that we, for example, when we do the forensic psychology module, you will go and join the policing students that do that, and I will teach both the policing and the psychology students. So it's a really nice kind of mix that you get to kind of get flavors of different departments that we have here at ULaw.
I mean, you're definitely convincing me that I should maybe swap to do psychology. So,
Alex, we do have our psychology conversion course, so it's never too late.
Exactly. Well, sounding tempting at this point. And I guess to kind of link between, so that's what the courses are, and kind of how you got into it. I guess the next thing is, what kind of skills can students learn through these psychology courses?
Yeah, so that's really important. I think one of the things that I'm very kind of open about is making sure that we are upfront and transparent with our students about what psychology and professional psychology looks like. In fact, we actually have a module on the master's conversion and the BSc, which is one of the first modules that the students do, called the applications of professional psychology. And what that is we take every branch of psychology and show you what that looks like in the real world. I think sometimes, unfortunately, some universities and marketing departments can kind of become a bit infatuated with kind of just getting students recruited by presenting them this kind of, you'll be Will Graham from Hannibal, or Cracker for anybody older who's listening. Those kind of things. You can make them think you're going to be running around hunting serial killers and things like that, when that's not really a true reflection of what a psychologist does and what psychology looks like in the real world. So I think it's really nice here at ULaw that we kind of demonstrate to students immediately, like, this is what a psychologist looks like, and what you'd be doing if you chose to work in this area. So I think that's really good. We obviously teach things like the skills required to be a psychologist. So things like the research skills, the ability to design studies, the ability to understand certain measures that you would use both in applied and research capacities, as well. But also, one thing we do focus on that module I was just talking about, application of professional psychology, but as well throughout, is we focus on transferable skills, because we are well aware that obviously not everybody is going to go on to be a psychologist or an academic. A lot of people, most people who study psychology will go on to do another career. And so one of the things we make a conscious effort to do here at ULaw is continuously highlight the transferable skills that students are learning. Things like data analysis, understanding data collection methods, the writing skills, understanding where to retrieve reliable sources and how to search literature, things like that, and how to kind of glean information and think critically, a skill that I think we all believe is probably lacking somewhat in general society. And I think that those kind of skills are equally as important as the psychology stuff.
Yeah, and then I think I may know where you're going to go with this one, but what would you say your favourite module on the course is to teach?
I will remove forensic psychology because I'm very biased,
that's
but obviously I do love that module. It's always great to kind of get to teach your own area and do that. That's always fun. And obviously it's the one I enjoy the most. But I would say it'd have to be a toss-up between either social psychology. I enjoy the modules I teach on that. That aligns with my PhD quite well, with group behavior and things like that. Because I think it's always interesting to kind of, when you're looking at social psychology, I think it's really good because everybody can kind of, they understand those interactions. They've experienced those interactions typically themselves, and then they can highlight. It's always really nice to kind of teach on that module and get students to kind of look at real world examples and apply what they're learning to real world examples that they've experienced. That's always something I try and get students to do quite a bit, and always goes down quite well and works quite nicely. But like I kind of alluded to earlier, I actually enjoy teaching the research method side of things. I take a bit of a professional pride in teaching stuff that nobody else wants to teach. The stats and the ontology and epistemology and all the kind of really complex stuff that nobody really wants to learn. And trying to I had a lecturer when I was an undergraduate who she went on to be one of my PhD supervisors, Natalie Norrett, and she was a fantastic stats lecturer, and she kind of kindled my love of stats and research methods because her teaching was so engaging, and I really enjoyed her sessions, and it made me actually enjoy stats and research methods. So I kind of want to believe I can kind of do a similar thing for the students I teach here at ULaw.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we've all been there where there's a slightly more boring aspect of a course, and then a teacher who really engages with the subject makes it totally different and enjoyable. So exactly,
it makes it much easier to learn. So that's kind of what I can pride myself on a little bit.
And then for the students listening who would like to apply to study psychology, would you give them any sort of advice before applying?
I think have an idea what it is that you want to do. What is it? Psychology is great in terms of employability, because here at ULaw we have a really good employability team as well that can help you out with all kinds of stuff. But our employability from a psychology perspective is fantastic, because we teach you, like I mentioned earlier, a bunch of skills that you can use not just in psychology but out in everyday life and in a variety of different settings. We actually have a module on the APP module where we have a unit on the APP module, sorry, where we actually look at careers outside of psychology, and so how psychology kind of manifests itself in different areas throughout society, professionally. So that's always really useful. One of the things I would suggest is there's more stats than you think there's going to be in psychology. I think that always seems to shock students, but there's not as much maths as you think those stats are going to require. Students always panic and say to me, "I'm not good at maths," and it's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're good at maths. It's just knowing what stats test to run, and then you click a few buttons and the software runs it for you. You don't have to really be good at maths. You just need to understand the statistics and all that jazz. But yeah, there's more stats, just less maths.
There we go. Sounds good to me. And then you've you've kind of been saying it throughout, obviously through the jobs you've gone into, and you don't have to go into a direct psychology job afterwards. But what sort of careers could a student expect after doing psychology?
I think obviously any kind of applied career in psychology. So you can go down any route of, a forensic psychologist, clinical psychologist, occupational, educational, wherever you want to go. So there's always that option. The option as well is academia. So if you want to go on to further studies, so do a master's, PhD and whatnot, and go down the route that I've ultimately gone down, with a little detour on the applied setting as well. You can go down and have a look at, being an academic, going and being a lecturer or being a researcher or whatever capacity. But also outside of psychology, you think about the transferable skills that I spoke about earlier. You've got things like, HR departments. Working in HR is a lot of overlap with psychology, understanding people, communication skills, data analysis, all those kind of things that you would commonly do in HR, as well. A lot of like market research stuff is really important. Marketing, way more of marketing is psychology than you think it is. My wife's undergraduate degree was in business and marketing, and she very kindly helped me design kind of the psychology of marketing bit. For my session on APP, when I do the transferable skills stuff, I do kind of a bit on marketing, and she very kindly helped me design that, and realizing kind of the overlap between marketing and psychology is really cool as well. Every time you go on to DFS and there seems to be one giant price crossed out in red and then a much cheaper price underneath to make you think, oh, that's a great deal. All those kind of things that actually it's just psychology.
Yeah, so it's much wider than just kind of, maybe the traditional sense of what people think of someone doing psychology would be. It's all about how people think in a day-to-day life, really, isn't it?
Yeah. People are always trying to, marketing and things like that. People are trying to make you buy something. People are always trying to make you behave in a certain way and use psychology to manipulate how you behave. And yeah, marketing's a good example of that.
And then, do you think there's anything the students could do to prepare before they started their first term doing psychology? Maybe a book they could read or anything they could kind of access to help them hit the ground running, sort of thing?
Yeah, I think one of the things you could probably do is kind of expose yourself to kind of journal articles and looking at what academic texts actually look like. One of the hardest things about making the transition to higher education is being able to write academically. I'm a lecturer, I'm a teacher ultimately, like I'm always going to say this, but reading is massively important. So I think really kind of telling students to engage with that kind of stuff, even if you'll struggle to get access to a lot of things, but there's a lot of freely available resources, reading stuff, kind of getting out there and kind of understanding what psychology articles look like and things like that. But more importantly for me, I'm not necessarily always fussed what level of psychology background or knowledge you come with. For me, I would rather students came with little knowledge. Obviously, I'd rather them come with good knowledge. That'd be great. But if it was anything, I'd rather them come with enthusiasm and a willingness to learn, because ultimately it's my job and the team's job to handle the rest, isn't it? We're going to teach you all the skills we need you to have. And ultimately, if you've got the enthusiasm and the desire to learn, that's infinitely more important to me. Because if you're coming with a decent base knowledge, but you can't be bothered to learn anything, it's going to be a long 3 years for you. But I'd much rather them have that enthusiasm and the willingness to kind of learn new things and be open-minded about what they're going to be taught.
And kind of linking that, the students with the enthusiasm to kind of go on further. Are there any organisations or charities do you think that would be good to kind of see if they could get some volunteering opportunities to kind of experience some real life psychology?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it totally depends on the area that you're interested in. So I can kind of speak to my experiences on that. So as an undergraduate, when I was old enough, I volunteered as a Samaritan's listening volunteer, and that was partially um, for personal reasons, but also to help me kind of get onto my masters and set me apart from other candidates, hopefully. And I ended up doing it for about 3.5 years until I moved, because I just it was a really rewarding kind of thing to do. But I was a phone volunteer at the Samaritans. It was a lot of training, but it was a decent amount of time you had to commit, but it was definitely rewarding and worth it in the end. But anything like that you can identify that aligns with your kind of area that you're interested in is definitely worth doing. There's all sorts of charities that you can get volunteering work at. That'll, as long as they align with what you want to do. If you're interested in an educational side of things, trying to get experience in schools is always great. But yeah, it just making sure that it aligns with what you want to do in the future.
Yeah, and then kind of linking it all together, what we've done already, but what do you think is the main draw for people who want to do psychology? Do you reckon, I mean, I know you mentioned earlier about different TV dramas and kind of people's views of psychology. Do you think those help bring people into the sector, or do you think it's just a mix of people's natural kind of urge to get into psychology that is the main driver for it?
Yeah, I think definitely the media kind of helps, where I think inherently kind of attracted to abnormal, different things. When we see somebody that behaves in a certain way and we think, I would never do that. Why would somebody do that? Ultimately that was sort of for me. Like I've always been, I'm a bit of a movie nerd, and I've always kind of been fascinated for me within movies by the villain, and the motivations of the villain and what leads a villain to behave in that route. And ultimately, that's probably the driving force behind becoming a forensic psychologist for me. But yeah, I do think there's, whether it's Darth Vader, the Joker, Hannibal Lecter, whoever it is, you really start to kind of think, well, what makes somebody behave that way? And you can see that every time there's a true crime documentary out on Netflix, or a dramatization, like Dharma or something like that came out last year. You can certainly see that understanding and getting a glimmer into why somebody is so different to the rest of us is attractive, and it's an interesting sort of element of life when you can see something totally different to your beliefs.
Would you say there's a particular kind of trait or characteristic that those people in I know you're talking about film villains, but do you think in general there's a sort of trait that kind of links them all, even though from one's perspective it seems a bit weird what they're doing all different, but actually there's a characteristic that links them all kind of together, why they do what they do?
I think it's difficult because there's just so many so many cases and so many variables. I think we as human beings generally like to have a nice little neat bow on top and be like, this is the one thing, and we identify this, and that means everyone who does that is going to be a serial killer. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There's lots of links to things like abandonment in early childhood and things like that, and there's a variety of different. And it's one of the things I emphasize to my students a lot, that there's a lot of factors that emphasize the likelihood that somebody may be antisocial or commit, crime and things like that. But actually, in the end, they're just, each one kind of increases the likelihood by a small percentage. And it sometimes is a confluence of factors. Sometimes it's, I worked with lads in the prison that had the most horrific upbringings. Some lads that were completely exposed to crime their entire lives. Most of their family were in and out of prison. And I also worked with lads who had, very good backgrounds and lived, very sort of meaningful and good lives up until the point that they didn't anymore. So it's it's fascinating. I think the fact that there isn't kind of one thing to point to is what makes psychology and to me forensic psychology as interesting as it is.
Yeah, and then I guess on the flip side of that one, would you say there's a particular personality trait that suits a career in psychology? Would you reckon that's just a more individualistic kind of thing? Anyone can do it, really?
Yeah, I think anybody with an interest could do it. I think it depends on what you are doing. I think for me, um, there are certain traits that would align somebody with psychology a little bit better, or being a better psychologist. For me, things like transparency and openness, they massively helped me when working with offenders. That was a huge thing for me, of being honest, upfront, transparent with them. Anytime you withheld something or lied, it was kind of a huge issue for them. So that really helped. And the biggest thing for me personally, and I preach this quite a lot in almost every capacity, not just psychology, but empathy. I think that empathy is a massively important skill.
Yeah. And then do you reckon, the students who are interested in doing psychology, is there a sort of a podcast you'd recommend that they can listen to at all?
Obviously the number one would be the 24 and 24 with Jonny Dudley podcast.
I didn't want to say it first, but I was tempted.
I'll plug the podcast for you, Alex. Not just this episode, but all of them, obviously. I don't necessarily think there is. I'm big an avid podcast listener, but I don't actually listen to any psychology podcasts, which now sounds terrible. I generally listen to. I'm a big American football fan, and so I generally listen to American football podcasts. But unfortunately, I don't really listen to psychology podcasts because I'm not doing psychology on my free time. As I often get asked the question when people find out I'm a psychologist, they'll always say something along the lines of, "Oh, are you psychoanalyzing everybody in the room, or are you, what am I thinking?" And I always say to them, "I'm not doing it on my free time. Like if you, I get paid to do this. I'm not doing it in my free time." So that's
just read the room.
Yes, exactly. I'm far too lazy anyway. I don't do it unless I have to.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's like anything, isn't it? So, but was there any kind of, maybe not a podcast, but maybe was there like a book or a film that kind of could help students?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
A book that's not in the course that they could read, sort of thing.
There's definitely some interesting stuff, out there that you can look at on psychology. My personal favorite is there's the Netflix TV series Mindhunter, which is an exceptional TV series on its own. David Fincher at his finest. But I am a big fan of the book, which I actually read as a teenager, on the man who set up forensic psychology in the FBI, and how kind of his experience of trying to integrate forensic psychology into the FBI was kind of laughed at to begin with, and now how it's become kind of a really key part of, like, you see criminal profiling being quite prominent in the US now, and how he kind of started it and brought it to the forefront. That's a really Mindhunter. It's a very good book.
Yeah, it sounds an intriguing one for sure. And then kind of looking ahead to the future, what do you think the impact of AI could be within the psychology industry?
I think largely probably positive. I think in terms of, well, we're looking at one of the issues we kind of have in this country around, especially things like mental health, is the access to therapy and the access to therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. And I think if we can kind of program AI software to be where we need it to be, using AI and kind of software and things like that to help plug some of those gaps. We've sort of seen, I'm sure we've all kind of experienced it now, but it kind of came to the forefront during the pandemic when we were having kind of FaceTime appointments with a GP. Almost those kind of things are going to become far more common because we can make it way more accessible to people. And using AI, I think, would be a really good way. And AI is kind of integrated in everything we do now. So using AI as a way of kind of therapy chatbots and things like that, I think would be a really good. Obviously, I've seen Black Mirror. I'm sure there's an avenue that we go down there and it ends in the complete destruction of the human race in some way. But yeah, I think that kind of thing is really good. Academia, it's kind of coming in, and I think maybe a positive in the way that it's forcing us to assess how we actually assess students. It's forcing us to think about how, rather than just getting people to write essays all the time now, it's like, well, actually, we need to be conscious of AI and how students use AI. And actually, one of the things we do quite nicely here at ULAW, I think, is rather than just saying, don't use AI, it's terrifying, stay away from it, you'll all fail. It's actually teaching students how they can potentially use AI to help them. So if they're struggling with certain things, they can use certain AI software to kind of give them ideas and certain sort of almost help them with a plan or something like that, but actually relying on AI for referencing and writing and academic writing and things like that is not going to work particularly well for them. But I definitely think that there's an avenue in academia that we can use it quite positively, and we're trying here at ULAW to do that. I use it in my teaching to generate images and things like that to kind of, to use in my slides. So it certainly has its place, and I think it's going to be useful going forward. But it just depends on how quickly it moves and how nefariously we end up using it.
I guess there's also that aspect of maybe more so with psychology than other things, that there's a certain amount that AI can do, but I would imagine it's the sort of thing you couldn't really replace the human aspect, as you said, the empathy, because there's only so much empathy you could get from an AI sort of machine or robot or whatever it could be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a key part of kind of the therapeutic relationship is exactly that relationship between the therapist and the client, and the fact of knowing that somebody is there listening to you and you're able to talk to somebody and communicate with them. I do think, like I said, I think AI chatbot side of things and from a therapeutics setting is probably not the ideal, but we can actually, see a potential to use that in a way that would kind of be a good layer. Because at the minute, if you're on a waiting list, you're seeing nobody. So the idea of using a chat bot or something like that until you can see somebody, a real life, living, breathing person, I think that would be pretty useful.
Yeah. And then to sort of round up this kind of section, what would you say your proudest achievement in the work you've done is so far?
That's a tough one. I'm not.
I was going to say, I thought I'd just bring it on you as a challenge, so
Yeah. I'm not really with kind of self-congratulatory stuff, to be honest. But I think for me, kind of actually, achieving my PhD was really something I was quite proud of. That's something I'd kind of set out to do when I started studying psychology at BSc, and kind of thought, 18-year-old me was like, one day I'd really like to kind of be to have a PhD and be Dr. Dudley and all that kind of stuff. And I thought that's something I'd really quite enjoy and want to do. And then to actually do it, whatever it is, years later, I think that was, I was really happy with that. And to kind of achieve that. And one of the funny things actually was, I while I was doing my PhD, I taught, and the students that I taught were at the same graduation that I was when I received my PhD this year, or last year, it will be at that point. And so it was really actually nice. That was the first time I'd seen students that I taught and helped, throughout the year kind of actually go and graduate. And so it was really it was a really pleasant feeling to be like, oh, I helped those students, I taught those students, I marked their work, things like that. And see them graduate. And that was a really cool feeling as well, to realize that actually the hard work you'd put into some of the students and things like that had actually worked out for them and helped them hopefully get where they want to be.
Yeah, exactly. You've helped them through, and then you see the end product, that kind of rewarding aspect of it, isn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly.
Before I let you go, Johnny, we're going to do 8 quick fire questions, just to round things off. So we're going to start with the first one is, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
I think I alluded to it earlier. I think it would be teaching empathy. I think that's something that's sorely lacking, unfortunately, in large parts of the world. And I think something that the world would be a better place, I think, if we were all a bit more empathetic. So I think to teach empathy would be a real game changer for me. Yeah.
And then if you were hosting a dinner party, could you name, up to 3 is a maximum, but 1's okay if that's all you could do, of guests, dead or alive, you'd like to invite to this dinner party, and why?
Okay, so I have 2 sets of 3. One that is my the good boy answer that I know I should say, and the other one is my purely selfish answer. So the first one is my wife, my daughter, and my grandmother. My grandmother passed away when I was a teenager. I was very close with her, and she never got to meet my wife and daughter. So I'd like to host a dinner party so that they could actually get to meet. So that would be my first one. But purely selfishly, as a huge sports fan, I'm a massive Leeds Rhinos fan. So Kevin Sinfield, Sir Kevin Sinfield, it should be. He was robbed of a knighthood in the New Year's honours list. I would have Sir Kevin Sinfield as one of my three. I'm also an avid American football fan and a New England Patriots fan. So Tom Brady would be there on the list as well. And then I follow basketball quite closely, and I'm a Milwaukee Bucks fan. So Giannis Antetokounmpo is my favorite basketball player. And just three, as somebody I've played sports for a long time and been fortunate enough to represent our country in American football and things like that. And I think getting the idea to talk to three athletes who achieved that my heroes growing up and have kind of achieved more in the sporting setting than I could ever dream to have achieved. I'd love to kind of chat to three people who are kind of true greats of their sport and pick their brains on what made them great.
Yeah, that's an interesting trio. I like those ones. They're good ones then. What is your favourite movie?
So I think I'm a bit of a movie nerd. I love film. One of my favorite films of all time. I'm a big Tarantino fan. So Pulp Fiction is the one I normally say when I have to do marketing stuff, because I can't say the World War II Inglorious movie. I can't really say the name without swearing, so I feel like I should say Pulp Fiction. But also, I'm a massive, colossal Star Wars nerd, and any Star Wars film, I'm very happy to just sit down and watch.
I was going to say, well, I'm a massive Star Wars nerd as well, so there we go.
There we go. So we'll save it till after the podcast to nerd out, Alex. I think we'll do that after.
Yeah, exactly. What is your, other than being a film nerd, what's your favourite way to relax?
So I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she obviously is very young. My wife also is very young in terms of her education of movies and film. So one of the things I pride myself as a father and a husband is educating my wife and daughter in the world of cinema, and watching movies with them is one of my favorite things to do. Also reading. My little girl's kind of really got into the idea of reading stories. So just reading together or watching a movie together, I think is my favorite way to relax.
Oh, and then going to another extreme now, if you were stranded on a desert island and you could only take 3 items with you, what would they be?
I think number one would be a rugby ball. I, especially growing up, was never without a rugby ball at any point. I like having a rugby ball in my hands. It makes me feel comfortable and relaxed. And I love just kicking the ball around. So that would keep me entertained. As well as entertainment, I would have a puzzle book. I love a crossword. I love a Sudoku, arrow words, the lot. So I'd be quite happy to sit, and a pen, obviously, as well. That's included, I hope. It's one of the ones that you buy another puzzle where you get a pen sellotape to the front. We'll just count that one thing. And then I'd have a wind-up radio, just to try and get me off the island, but not too soon. I think I'd probably enjoy a few days just relaxing, and then I'd try and get off the island with my wind-up radio.
I was going to say, you got to give it a go for a few days before you leave.
Just relax a bit, enjoy, and then I'll crank the radio up and try and see if I can get my way off the island.
And then, favorite place to travel for yourself?
So I went to New Zealand as a teenager, as a big rugby fan and a Lord of the Rings fan. That was fantastic. That's probably one of my favorite places I've ever been to. Getting to see Mount Doom for real life, that was awesome. And going and watching New Zealand play was incredible. Also, I went to Disney World as a kid, loved Disney World, and we're taking my daughter this year. So I'm very, very much looking forward to taking my little girl to Disney World and seeing her face when she sees Mickey. And also I've also indoctrinated her into Star Wars, so when she sees Darth Vader as well, I can't wait.
Yeah, exactly. Win-win. And then who do you think you admired the most and why?
For starters, my wife. She's probably the best person I've ever met. So I've got to say her. She's the person I admire the most. As a new parent, Definitely have an increased admiration, which I was very high anyway, but an increased admiration for my own parents, and how difficult being a parent is at times. And just a constant say to my dad, I was like, thank you, thank you for my childhood, because it's not easy being a parent. But then also Kevin Sinfield, what he's done for motor neuron disease after his playing career is finished, and Rob Burrow, his teammate, one of my heroes, another one of my heroes growing up as a Leeds Rhinos player, what he's done to help him is truly insane. Kevin Sinfield was my idol when he was a rugby player growing up, and he's even more so as an adult now with everything he's done for Rob Burrow and things for charity, and just a truly incredible person. Yeah. So yeah, he's up there as well.
Yeah, no, all of them are fantastic choices. And then the last one to round it all off, what advice would you give an 18-year-old Jonny?
That's a tough one. I think, to be honest with you, the main thing for me, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I always think I have a tendency to kind of fixate on not failing rather than actually succeeding. And I think one of the things I've kind of learned as I've got older, and I speak to myself 10 years ago and kind of say, what I would change is to not be afraid of failure, and then actually, there's things that I've done that I've not succeeded first time, but actually learning lessons and what you kind of develop out of failure. And ultimately, if you develop something out of it and you learn something from it, I don't think it is a failure. And that lack of success can often be something that puts you somewhere where you need to be instead, and you make the best of a situation that you've got. And I think that's a really important lesson that I think I probably, as I've matured, I've learned and kind of become much better at understanding that actually, right, if I don't succeed at something the first time, that's okay. I just need to know how to get better and how to succeed the next time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too long ago for me, but I would totally agree with with that one for me. I always found it's better to know where you've gone wrong or give something a go than just kind of not give something a go just because you're scared of failing about it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought the same thing, Alex, in terms of it wasn't that long ago for me. And then I counted up and realized it was 10 years ago and thought, oh my God, no, that's way further back than I thought it was. That was quite alarming
Time
for me.
travels.
But yeah, it does. It really, really does. Quite scarily so.
Yeah. So, but thank you very much for joining me today, Jonny.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
No worries. And you provided such a great insight into the psychology course and obviously your journey to becoming a lecturer. And thank you for obviously the fun outro answers as well. To know more
my
about
pleasure.
you.
They were good fun.
So to find out more about the psychology courses and the support available from the University of Law, could you please visit our website, which is law.ac.uk, and then also do please give us a follow to keep up to date with our next episode. And thank you for listening, and goodbye.